Swallows and Amazons by Arthur Ransome. Chapter 5. First Night on the Island. After they'd finished the eggs and the rice pudding and the brown bread and butter and the seed cake and the apples, the mate and the able seaman did some washing up. The spoons had to be cleaned and the frying pan scraped and the mugs and pudding basins swirled in the lake. The captain and the boy took the telescope and found a good place on the high ground above the camp at the northern end of the island, where they could lie in a hollow of the rocks and look out between tufts of heather without being seen by anyone. Close behind them was the tall pine tree that they had seen when they looked at the island from the peak in Darien. Captain John lay on his back in the heather and looked up at the tree. "Properly," he said. "We ought to have a flagstaff on the top of it." "What for?" said Roger. "So that we could hoist a flag if there was a signal. Supposing Susie and Titty were here alone together while you and I had gone fishing." "We've forgotten our fishing rods," said Roger. "We'll get them tomorrow," said John. "But supposing we were away fishing and the natives came back and the ones that made the fireplace, then if we saw the flag hoisted we should know something was the matter and come back to help. And it would make a fine lighthouse too. If any of us were sailing home after dark, whoever was left on the island could hoist the lantern and make the tree into a lighthouse so that we could find the island however dark it was." "But Susan and Titty and I could never climb the tree. It's got no sticky out branches." Like most pines, the tree was bare of branches for the first 15 or 20 feet of its height. "If I can swarm up it as far as the bottom branch, I could hang a rope over it so that both ends came to the ground. Then no one would have to climb it again. Anybody could tie the lantern to the rope and pull it up. One end would have to be tied to the ring on the top of the lantern and the other to the bottom, so we could pull it up, either up or down, and keep it from swinging about." "Have you got enough rope?" said Roger. "We haven't any small enough. The anchor rope is much too thick, and the spare rope isn't long enough. I'll have to get some small rope tomorrow. It's a good thing I've had a birthday before we came here. We can get plenty of rope with 5 shillings. Just then Mate Susan and able seaman Titty joined them and threw themselves down into the heather. "Everything's ready for the night," said Susan, "except the beds, and we can't make them till the native brings the hay bags." Titty jumped up. "There's a boat coming now," she said. "Roger, you must be sleepy or you haven't seen it." "I'm not sleepy," said Roger. "I wasn't looking." "You can be wide awake and not see a thing when you aren't looking." Captain John sat up and put the telescope to his eye. "It is the native, and he's got Mother with him." Let me have the telescope," said Titty. John gave her, and she stared through it. "Mother is a native too," she said at last. "Let me have it," said Roger. He fixed the telescope to his eye and pointed it the right way. "I can't see anything at all," he said. "It's all black." "You've got the cover over the eye place," said Titty, who knew about telescopes. "Twist it round and it'll come open again." "I can see them now," said Roger. The native, who was Mr. Jackson from the Hollyhoe farm, was rowing his boat with long steady strokes. It looked like a water spider far away, but through the telescope it was easy to see that it was a boat, and to see the big lumps of the hay bags, and to see that Mother was sitting in the stern. Roger and Titty took turns with the telescope as the boat came nearer. The captain and the mate went down to the camp to make sure that everything was ready to show the visitors. The captain put his tin box, the big one, against the back of his tent in the middle. He took the little barometer out of it and hung it on the fastener in front of the box. There was nothing else in the tent, so that it was very neat indeed. Titty and the mate had made their tent much more homelike. In the middle of it were the biscuit tins with the food in them. These tins made 2 seats. Then at each side of the tent were their beds. Where their beds were going to be, they had spread out their blankets and folded in the tops of them. The cooking things were neatly arranged in one corner, just inside the tent, and outside the tent, on the rope on which the tent was hung, 2 towels were drying. Captain John looked in and then went back to his own tent and spread his and Roger's blankets in the same way. They certainly made the tent look more as if it had been lived in. And after all, it would be no bother to come and put the hay bags under them when they came. Mate Susan put a few more sticks on the fire to make a cheerful blaze. Then they went back to the others. "The natives will be here soon," said Titty. "Shall we show them the harbour?" "No," said John. "You never know with natives, even friendly ones. We'll keep Swallow hid. It isn't as if Mother were by herself." "Besides," said Susan, "they were bringing the hay bags, and the landing place is close to the camp. It'll be much easier to carry them from there than through the thicket at the low end of the island." All the crew of the Swallow stood up and pointed to the east. Mother, the female native in the stern of the rowing boat, pointed between the island and the mainland on the eastern side to show that she knew what they meant. She said something to the native at the oars, and he glanced over his shoulder and, pulling strongly with his left for a stroke or two, altered his course. They were passing the head of the island. Roger had already run to the landing place. The others of the Swallow were close behind him, and when the native ran his boat ashore, the whole ship's company were on the beach, ready to help him pull the boat up. "But what have you done with your ship?" asked Mother. "Where is the Swallow?" "Alla walla kalla kukalaka waka kulla," said Titty. "That means, if we can't possibly tell you because you're not a native. A nice native, of course." "Burro borum gee bomding," said Mother. "That means I don't care where she is so long as it's all right." "She's in a splendid place," said Captain John. "Shall I interpret for you?" said Titty gently. "As a matter of fact," said Mother, the female native, "I've picked up quite a lot of English, that with talking to you, but I'll walla calla walla instead, if you'd rather I did." "If you know English, there's no need," said John. "Gluck," said the female native. "That means all right. Now I hope you're going to let the natives see your camp so that we can help to carry up your hay bags. Mr. Jackson, the farmer from Holly Howe, has taken all 4 hay bags out of the boat. He was very powerful, strong native, and he picked up 3 of the hay bags together and hove them up on his shoulders. John and Susan carried the 4th. Roger took the female native by the hand, and Titty showed the way to the tents. "Well, you have got a lovely camp," said the female native. "Isn't it?" said Susan. "Would you like to come inside this tent?" The female native stooped and went in. Mr. Jackson dumped down his hay bags. The female native stooped and went in. Mr. Jackson dumped down his hay bags. "Come on, Roger," said John. "Let's get our tent all ready before she comes in." John took hold of one end of the hay bag. Roger helped, and between them they pulled first and then another hay bag into their tent. They put one on each side of the tent, punched them and shook them until they were fairly even, and covered them with their folded blankets. Then they lay down, each on his bed. Meanwhile, Susan and the female native were making up the beds in the other tent. Mr. Jackson had gone back to his boat. Presently, the female native put her head into the captain's tent. "You look comfortable enough in here," she said, "but what are you going to do when it gets dark?" "We've brought 2 lanterns," said John. "I forgot about that. We've only got the big lantern for the whole camp. I've brought you 2 small candle lanterns, one for each tent if you promise to be careful with them and not set the tents or yourselves on fire." "Where is the oil for the big lantern?" "Just outside the tent," said John. "You ought to keep it in a safe place well away from the camp and from the fire." Just then that powerful native, Mr. Jackson, came back with another load from the boat. Come along out," said the female native. "I'm not going to stop here now, because Mr. Jackson must be getting back to his farm, but there are several things to be settled. First of all, about the milk. There are no cows on your island, so you will have to go to the mainland for milk. I have arranged with the farm over there, Dixon's farm, to let you have a quart of milk every morning. If you want more in the evening, Mrs. Dixon will let you have it. But every morning you must row over there to bring your milk. You can see their landing place by the big old oak." "Thank you, Mr. Jackson." The powerful native had put down a big basket that he had brought up from the boat. In it was a milk can and lots of other things. The female natives began taking them out as if she were digging the presents out of a bran pie. "Here is the milk can for you," she said, "and mind you keep the milk as cool as you can during the day. Keep it out of the sun, and do remember to wash the can very clean before you take it up to the farm for more. Then, for tomorrow, I've bought you a meat pie Mrs. Jackson cooked today. You will soon get tired of living on corned beef. Pemmican, said Titty. Pemmican, said the female native. So if I were you, I should only open a pemmican tin when you haven't anything else that you can eat without cooking. By the way, Susan is the chief cook, isn't she? Yes, said Captain John. Then I'll give the stores over to her. There is the pie. Then I've bought a box of force for breakfast. Susan is going to have a busy time without having to cook porridge in the mornings. I like cooking, said mate Susan. If you want to go on liking it, said the female native, take my advice and make the others do the washing up. Mr. Jackson came up again from the boat carrying a big sack. Mrs. Jackson has been good enough to let you have your pillows here, there, said the female native. You can sleep without them, I know, but a pillow makes so much more difference that I'm sure Christopher Columbus himself always took his own pillow with him. The pillows were taken out and 2 were taken into each tent. Did you see the pirate with the parrot? Asked Titty when she came out after stowing her pillow. What pirate? Asked the female native. The one on the houseboat. We saw him and his parrot. Mrs. Jackson laughed. So that's what you call him, he said. I dare say you're right. I saw the houseboat, said the female native. It's Mr. Turner, said the powerful native. He usually lives on the houseboat in summertime. This year he won't let anyone go near him. Last year those Blackett girls, nieces of his from the other side of the lake, were always with him. Not this year, though. Keeps himself to himself this summer, does Mr. Turner. No one knows what he does. But they do say he's got things in that houseboat worth a fortune. That's his treasure, said Kitty. I knew he was a retired pirate. Of course he can't let anybody go near it. Vicky will be wanting me, said the female native, so I won't stay with you. And anyhow, you don't want too many natives about, I'm sure. It's beginning to get dark, and if I were you, I should be early to sleep, for the sun will wake you up in the morning, even if the birds don't. Thank you ever so much for bringing the things, said Susan. Especially the lanterns, said Titty. Glook, 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 said the female native, as she began to walk down to the landing place. No, I think I won't have any tea, thank you. You've had yours, and the day is nearly over. Oh, she added, there's one thing I'd forgotten. She went for a moment into the captain's tent and came out again smiling. Then as she walked down to the boat, she said to John, I'm not going to keep on coming to bother you. You don't bother us, Mother, said John. I'm not going to anyhow, but I'm going to ask you to let me know every 2 or 3 days, or oftener if you like, that everything is all right. You'll be wanting provisions, you know, and we natives can always supply them, so you'll be calling now and then at Hollyhow, won't you? I'll come tomorrow if you like, said John. Yes, I'd like to know how the first night went. What did you do in my tent just now, Mother? Said John. You'll see when you get back. The female native stepped into the boat and went to the stern and sat down. Mr. Jackson, that strong native, pushed the big boat off, kneeling on the gunwale of her as she slid away. He had the oars out in a moment and pushed away into the evening. Goodbye, 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 Mother, shouted the Swallow's crew. Goodbye, Mr. Jackson. Good night to you, said Mr. Jackson. Drool, said the female native. That means good night and sleep well. Drool, drool, they shouted back. They ran to the head of the island to the lookout place under the tall pine, and waved at the boat with the natives rowed away into the dusk. Long after they could not see the boat, they could see the white flashes as the oars lifted from the water, and long after they could not see them at all, they could hear the sound of rowing growing fainter and fainter in the distance. We'd better be getting back to sleep before it's quite dark, said mate Susan. Lights out in half an hour, said Captain John. But we haven't lit our lights yet, said Roger. No, but we're just going to, said Captain John, opening his lantern and striking a match. There was still some light outside, though not much. But in the tents, they're not much darker under the trees, but in the tents it was quite dark. John lit his lantern and took it into his tent and put it on the tin box, which he moved into the middle so that there would be no danger of setting fire to the tent walls. Then he remembered that the female native had done something in his tent just before she went away. He looked around to see what it was. Pinned to the tent wall near the head of his bed was a scrap of paper. On it was written, "If not duffers, won't drown." "Daddy knows we aren't duffers," said John to himself. Susan had put a lantern on one of those 2 biscuit tins. She and Titty were making their beds comfortable. The tents looked like big paper lanterns glowing under the trees. Shadows moved about inside them. It always takes some time to get comfortable on a hay bag the first night. There were voices. "Are you all right, Titty?" "Aye, aye, sir." "What about that boy?" "He's all right, Mr. Mate." "Are you ready for lights out?" "Yes." Lights out. The 2 lanterns were blown out and the white tents were part of the darkness. There was no light now but the glow of the embers on the campfire. "Good night, good night, good night." There was no noise now but the lapping of the lake on the rocks. In a few moments the captain, the mate, the able seaman and the boy were all fast asleep.